Duncan reads well, doesn't he? Yes. Good job. Thank you. Well, good morning. If I haven't met you before, my name's Glenn. I have the privilege of getting to lead the church here, and I have the privilege of preaching through this section of Genesis over the next 6 weeks. We're going to get ourselves to Genesis, the end of Genesis chapter 3, and then after Christmas we're going to do 4 to 11, and then we're going to leave Genesis after that because we'll all have had enough of Genesis by then. The good thing is this week's passage is dead straightforward and there's nothing at all controversial or complicated in it, so we're looking much simpler than the last few weeks. There's a whole bunch of things. Let me just quickly remind you of what we've been saying over the last few weeks. So the first thing is, we said this was an adult book. It's an 18 certificate, and it's for two reasons. One, some of the material we're about to encounter in these next few weeks is actually pretty brutal. There's lots of, there's death, and there's murder, and there's all sorts of sexual shenanigans going on, and there's people being kidnapped, and there's just every awful thing you could think of. And I'm saying awful thing, but people pay for money to go to the cinema and watch that stuff. But it's in the first bit of the Bible here, so we're going to come across all that. But it's also an adult book because it requires us to think sensibly, wisely, and about really complicated matters. And it's got to be willing to hold the fact that at some points we're going to be able to say, this is what we think this says, and we're in the realm of mystery, okay? Now that takes somebody grown up to be able to say that, okay? So we're looking for grown-ups in the room, so it's an adult book. If you weren't here last week, this next slide's going to freak you out. Please don't worry about it. Just ignore it if you weren't here. So we said last week that in 6 days, God creates the heavens and the earth, and the main things that you need to concern yourself with there is that at the beginning, God said the earth was formless and void, and in days 1 to 3, he deals with the formlessness thing and he makes it ordered. And in days 4 through 6, the emptiness becomes fullness. And so that's the movement of those first 6 days in Genesis chapter 1. And we also realize that there's a parallelism. So in day 1, it's about lights, and in day 4, it's also about lights, a different kind of lights. And in day 3, it's about a dry land with plants that have seed. And in day 6, it's about living creatures with humans who have seed. So there's a whole thing going on there that we could be there forever about, but we did that last week. That was one picture of what we saw in Genesis chapter 1 last week. And then the second picture was a little drawing, and lots of people like this one better because they're like, it's a picture. One person said, why did you not colour it in? I was like, for goodness sake, complaints. The reason I didn't colour it in is because I didn't draw it. Somebody else did. This is a picture of what happened. So it says that in day 1 we got darkness and light separated. Day 2 we get the waters separated from the waters. Day 3 we get the land. That's that little lumpy bit separated from the waters below. And then in day 4 we got lamps in the sky, so stars, and then what he calls the greater light and the lesser light, so the sun and the moon, they're in the sky on day 4. And then on day 5, we get birds in the air and fish in the sea. And then on day 6, we get living creatures. That's that giraffe-like thing eaten from the tree by the looks of things. And then we get humans, day 6. And they've got little crowns because they're given a royal priesthood to rule and to reign. And we'll say more about that this morning. Okay, some of you are going, why could you not do it that quickly? Last week, we were here forever before you describe all that. Okay. So the other thing to say at this point is that as we wrestle through all of this, we recognize it's really complicated and messy. And one of the things that we're doing is that on the 9th of November, 12:45, so after church, bring your own lunch, because basically I'm tight and I'm not buying you a lunch. We're going to meet in the cafe downstairs and bring your questions. What is it that's come up in the book of Revelation for you that you don't understand? Sorry? Yeah, I mean, you can bring your questions about the book of Revelation. I'm not sure I can answer them for you, but the book of Genesis, the stuff we've been going through. Don't let your wife sit in the front row because you're just, yes, you all knew what I meant, didn't you? No, you didn't know what I meant. Okay. All right. Thankfully, God sent me a helper. So we will return to that later. So in Genesis, We will be looking at our questions, and what we'll do, I've asked if you've got some already, please email them in, and we'll frame some stuff around that. But we'll also have a conversation. What is it that you want to talk about that we've either covered already or that you think we might want to cover? And we'll be there for, frankly, as long as it takes us to eat our lunch and answer our questions, and we'll do that. So there we go. Okay, to Genesis 2. Everybody okay with where we are now? You're all perfectly clear about what Genesis 1 says. Okay, excellent. Okay, Genesis 2. First question, is this a different story? I don't know what you thought when you heard that today. If you were here and you know Genesis chapter 1, you're like, hold on, this is different. And it is different. We need to be honest about that because it seems to start in a slightly different place. What's going on? Well, I think it's really important that we recognize it's not a different story, but it is from a different viewpoint, that they're looking completely different positions. This is not about saying that there's one kind of filmed version of exactly what happened at the beginning of creation, like somebody made a movie of it, and all we need to do is watch the movie. We're being told two different stories so that we'll see more. This is a picture from the James Webb Telescope. We know a lot about the James Webb Telescope in this church. Sort of. Anyway, that was a terrible in-joke that nobody got, so let's move on before I make a fool of myself. This is from the James Webb Telescope. Massive deep space. Absolutely beautiful. This is Van Gogh's The Starry Night. They're both an image of the same thing, but they're from a completely different perspective. We see something completely different. They're both real. They're both true. They're just very different. This is Genesis 1 and 2. They are both real. They're both very different. I think the author is not intending that Genesis 1 and 2 are thought to be like some sort of camcorder recording of the events, but rather they're literary devices to tell us things about the why and the who of creation. It's showing us from different perspectives so that we might understand a little more. And this morning we're going to look at three different things. We're going to look at the garden, we're going to look at the creation of humans, we're going to look at 4 relationships that humans have, and we're going to look at 2 trees. Okay? Makes sense. Some of this you'll be like, well, why are we talking about that today? It's only because if we don't talk about that today, we can't talk about the other stuff next week. So we need to do that. Okay? Here we go. The garden. So this was our picture, right? We just explained that. This is our picture of what the cosmos, what the creation looks like. According to the writer of Genesis. And in Genesis 2, they introduce some new things to this, and they are this. So first of all, we're told we've got the land, so the whole thing is the land. But within the land, Eden is created, so this place called Eden. And then within Eden, there is a garden created in which the humans find themselves eventually placed. And we've got these 2 trees that are now given names, or we have given information about these 2 trees in particular. One is the tree of life, and the other one brings death, and we'll say more about those 2 trees later. But this is our updated picture that we're working from. So, and again, we'll send these slides out this week, so if you're interested in having them, you can have them. But this is what we now find our world that looks like. We've got this thing called the land, this place called Eden, and then this garden in the middle of it. And it's going to be really important for us because there's something about the fact that humans are placed in particular places. We're actually in locations, and I'll say more about that in just one moment. But we're going to move first of all to humans, or as I read this week, perhaps better thought of as earthlings. I like this word. Is that a Star Trek thing? I must be geeky sci-fi people in here. Nick, do you know about this? No, I don't know why. I don't know why. I thought you might be but I think it feels like there's a thing like greetings, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, you can tell I don't watch stuff like that. The reason that this is a really helpful phrase, this earthlings idea, is that it keeps translated as humans or as man, it keeps it in connection with the ground. Because what's amazing is that the word Adam, which is what we get Adam from, which means man, is very similar to the word for ground, which is hadamah. And so they're really related. So the problem with our English word is that we lose that connection. Whereas if we keep the word earthling, it gives us some idea of it. And as we'll see in a moment, if I say man, you think of someone like me as opposed to someone like Karen. This is a man, this is a woman, and we'll get to that. And the earthling idea is more, shall we say, androgynous or not so connected. Give me one of those. This is working, yep. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, the humans are placed on the earth, and we see in Genesis 2, verse 7, that they are, it says, then the Lord God formed a man, Adam, from the dust of the ground and breathed into the nostrils of the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So there's a whole bunch of things we're going to see here, but first of all, let's just think about this. What is it to be human? Well, we already know something from chapter 1 in verse 26 and verse 27. He says that we're invited to rule. So he says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground. And so we get this invitation to rule. And then in verse 28, it says, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. And so we get this sense of having some authority over creation. And then in chapter 2, we just read in verse 16, and the Lord God commanded the man, you're free to eat from any tree in the garden. No, wrong verse. Where have I put it? I didn't make this up. It is in here, I promise. That in chapter 2, it tells us that we're to work the ground and take care of it. Oh, and it's verse 15. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So we have purpose in looking at how we look after this earth that we live in. And next week, Belle's going to take the whole sermon to think about that, this ecology piece. What is it for us to be people who care for creation? But this is a royal part of our purpose as those created by God. It's our function under God. And that's really important because I think it begins to help us understand what it means for us to be human. And it's to rule and to subdue the earth. But there's context to that, and I love this quote. The function of human image bearers of God in Genesis chapter 1 is not to exercise autonomous dominion over other creatures. In other words, it's not to just say, well, I've been given authority, therefore I can go and do whatever I want, but to exercise this dominion under God and as representatives of God. So as we approach how we think about humans being in control of the earth or given reign over it, it's supposed to be done thinking about God and who he is. So if that's the first thing, then what's the next one? Well, we've got the royal rulers. But he then makes them male and female. Okay, so this now gets into the complex stuff. Are we ready? Everybody's excited. So it says that he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. This is where it gets complicated because, first of all, I don't think rib is a very good translation. In fact, in most other places in the Bible, the word that's used there is not translated as rib. It's translated as side, typically. So we could read it to say, and he took a side of the man. And in actual fact, I think if you have an NIV, it will often have an alternate reading that says something like, or took part of the man's side there. And I think this begins to point us to something, which is that actually this isn't just about creating a woman out of like a spare part from the man. It's actually that whatever the earthling was, in the splitting, we get male and female. And why does this matter? Well, as we'll see in a second, God had looked and saw that the earthling, it was not good. We've listened to Genesis Genesis chapter 1, and in the first 6 days, everything was good. It was good, it was good, it was good, it was very good. And then when we get in chapter 2, we discover that there's one thing that is not good, and it's that the earthling is alone. And so God is going to look for a helper, and again, we'll come to that in a second, but God is going to look and find someone. A suitable helper needs to be found. And they look at all the animals and say, could it be this one? 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 And God says, no, this is not good. And so the side of the earthling is taken. And it's only then we have male and female. And it's then good again. And so for us to be human, first of all, it means that both male and female are the image of God. Really important, right? There have been times in history when the church hasn't been so good and wasn't so convinced that that was true. They were wrong. Male and female are clearly both the image of God. But also that it is good that there is diversity, that there is difference, but that there's also something that is similar. They came from the same place. Karl Barth puts it like this. He says, if the helper is only like Adam, in other words, the animals, right? The animals are like Adam. We have a lot of similarities with Adam. Loneliness will be alleviated because Adam will see only himself. So if that which was made from Adam was only like him, he would still be lonely because he'd only see himself. But if the helper is only different from Adam, loneliness will not be alleviated because it will be just like the animals. They're not like him. They are different than him. So God creates woman. She is the helper fit for Adam, suitable for Adam, because she is both like him and different from him. In the female human, the male human meets someone who is both like him and yet different from him, and vice versa. In the male human, the female human meets someone who is both like her and yet different from her. And as a consequence, it means that loneliness can be alleviated. This was the problem that was being dealt with. And so we are left with male and female. And it seems to me that it's profoundly important that we recognize that God, in his good creation, has made male and female, and that difference matters. And I recognize in this world that's a controversial statement, and for some a very difficult statement, but I think it's what the scriptures teach us, that it is good that humans are different from one another in their biological sex, and that matters. And that it's profoundly important to our image-bearingness because we do so as male and as female. But then there's this other point here which, I'll be honest, has caused some concern in times past, and that is that the woman is called the helper to Adam. And I made a small joke earlier at the expense of my wife being my helper. I think there is a vision of the world that says that this woman is a helper, and what we think of as that is some sort of person to come along and make sure that the dishes are done and that there's a dinner on the table at 5 o'clock in the evening, that all the clothes are washed, and that the man is kept happy. Okay, I don't know how, I'm assuming you don't think helper like that, but I promise you, at times in history, people have thought helper like that. It is nowhere near what the scriptures have to say here. In fact, I think this might be one of the key verses in the entire Bible for affirming women. So let me explain to you. So the word that's translated as helper is the Hebrew word ezer. And the only other places in the Bible it's used is it refers to God. The only other times in the Bible it refers to God, who is the one who brings help to people. This is not some weak-willed helper there to do the dishes. The implication is that the Ezer, the helper, is somehow more capable than the one in need. Which makes sense, right? Because if I'm in need of help, if I break down at the side of the road, right? Or actually, let me say that better. If you break down at the side of the road, if Nick phones me and says, Glenn, my lovely Skoda's broken down at the side of the road, we can't use all the old jokes we used to tell about Skodas because they're actually good cars now. It's disappointing, but there you go. I did see a Lada the other day. Anyway, that's a tangent. Anyway, Nick's phoned me. Car's broken down at the side of the road. My Skoda's bust. Can you come and help me? Right? What would I do? I would give Nick my brother's number because my brother is a mechanic and he could be a useful helper to Nick. If I turned up, I would do the manly thing and I would open the front of the bonnet and I'd stand there and I'd scratch my chin and I'd go, I don't know, I reckon we should phone the AA. I would not be someone of help because I would be useless. My brother, on the other hand, he could turn up and fix it. And if he couldn't fix it, he would turn up with his big van and he could tow you away. A helper is someone who is more capable than the one in need. Kenneth Bailey, who's a theologian, he says this of the word Ezer. It does not refer to a lowly assistant to the boss, but rather to a powerful figure who comes to help or save someone who is in trouble and cannot manage alone. He carries on, women are placed by God on the human scene as the strong who come to help or save the weak. That is the dignity of women in the Bible. Now, it's clear we have not always behaved like that. It is clear the Bible has not always been read like that, and it's clear that there are other parts of the Bible we're going to read where we're going to go, how does that work? But this is why we're studying Genesis. Because I want to say that we cannot read any of the other parts of Scripture through a lens that doesn't include coming back here to say, what is the calling of women? It is to be the strong side helper of men as they both bear the image of God. This is why it's profoundly important that we read this stuff. Because I can see some of you sitting there and you're going, how much longer are we going to be in Genesis? Because this is a bit complicated. I'm a bit done. I'd like something a bit simpler. But this is the lens through which we read everything else. So every time we come up with a text that seems to put women in a place that's unhelpful or not as a strong place, we ought to be taking this lens out and saying, well, okay, wait a minute, what is this actually saying? Why is it teaching us this? And we need to hold on to that. That makes sense? Okay, good. Helper. There we go. Okay. 4 relationships. This is the main part of today. Although for some of you, you're just going to go away going, saying to your husband, see, I told you. We're going to look at 4 relationships that I think are created in Genesis 2 that then become, I think, profoundly important as we read Genesis 3, and particularly as we ask about, what is this God thing anyway, and particularly, what on earth was Jesus all about? Okay? Because those seem like really important questions. So, the first is 4 relationships. First of all, a human relationship with the land. And again, Belle's going to do this in a lot more depth next week. But I want to recognize that this is a profoundly important relationship. It begins with us being taken from the ground. We've talked about that, the Adam and the Adamah. And then it continues as we're given authority to rule over the earth. And one of the important aspects of this earthiness is that we're given bodies. Okay? It says that our bodies matter. Okay? And our faith cares about embodiment. As some have said, I do not have a body, I am a body. Now, this is challenging, right? Because some of us don't like the bodies we have. Some of us would much rather get rid of them and get a new one. And that's painful and difficult when people find themselves in those circumstances. And there's lots of reasons for that people feel like that. But what we must not do as Christians is somehow think the body's a bad thing we're supposed to get rid of. That's not what we believe. We believe that in order to be human, we must have a body, a physical body, and it is a good thing to have a body. In fact, it's impossible to be a human without a body. that has some implications. First of all, it means our spirituality is earthly, not heavenly, right? We're not trying to escape to heaven in order that we can have a relationship with God. Presumably, we can do so here with our physical bodies. The second thing is that we have limits, right? I don't know about you, but I know my body has limits. And every year I live, I learn that my body has more limits. So one of my friends turned 50 a few weeks ago. And we were saying, right, what do you want to do for your birthday, Mark? What do you want to do? He said, I want to go camping with the boys. And I was like, I presume you're talking about different boys than me. And he said, no, you and Dave and Finn and me, and we'll go camping. We'll go up in the Cairngorms in October. We'll take our tents and we'll stay overnight and we'll have a fabulous time. Right? At this point, I'm realizing Mark's vision of hell and mine are very different. My body has limits because I slept one night on the floor of the Cairngorms, staring up at the starless sky, freezing. And I woke up in the morning, which assumes, first of all, I actually went to sleep, which I'm not really sure I did. I woke up in the morning and somehow my back was no longer the thing it had been before I went to bed. It doesn't bend, it doesn't move. And it contains pain that is unknown to man or woman in history. Forget childbirth, my back after lying in the Cairngorms for one night. Our bodies have limits. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing, it's a gift. And if we can learn to live with the limits our bodies have, we will learn more and more about what it is to rely on others. And in relying on others, we'll discover something of what it is to be human. We're also local people. You see, bodies root us in particular places. I can't be in two places at once because I have a body. I'm not some sort of esoteric soul or spirit that floats about that could be in a couple of places at once or transport from one place to another. I have a body. I'm local. We see that in our text. God took the man and woman, or the man, and put him in the Garden of Eden. He was taken from one physical place to another. This matters. I actually think in our current age, it matters profoundly because we are exposed to stuff from all around the world. Okay? We know what's going on in the Middle East. We know what's going on in the United States. We know what's going on in Australia. And many of those things are really traumatic and difficult. And yet, we're not built really to deal with that. We're local people. We're supposed to be able to feel pain and sorrow for the people that we experience around us. And most of the research says that number can go up to about 300 or so before it starts to break down. And we understand how that works. So we turn up at funerals and we grieve. We go to weddings and we rejoice. We turn up to somebody's house who's had a baby and we celebrate with them. We know what it is to mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice when it's a small thing. But the problem we've got is that we're exposed to everything. And we're supposed to feel everything for everywhere all of the time. And it's no wonder, particularly our young people are struggling with their mental health. Because they're bombarded with stuff all the time. Because we live as if we're capable of being global people who just absorb everything from everywhere. And yet we're not built like that. We're built with bodies. We're built in local places. Now, all I'm doing is identifying a problem here because I don't really have a solution. The world we live in is just that. But I do think we need to think well about how we then embrace our technology. These things are great. And they're a curse, right? They bring everything to us all of the time. Why would we put limits on this? The only reason we put limits on it is because our bodies have limits. We are not able to cope with everything that's in here. Can we find ways to live well with that stuff? Those of us who are parents, I think, have a constant challenge to wrestle with this, particularly the technology piece. How do we help our kids understand what it is to work with technology and be embodied, living in a particular place in a particular time with a particular group of people? And everything that I have to say beyond that is pure conjecture and opinion on my part. So I'll leave that for another day. If you're interested in what I think you can do as a parent, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. But we're local people because we're embodied. Another implication is that for our worship, our bodies matter in worship. The Bible tells us to lift up holy hands to God. It says that we should bow down before him. It says that we should sing. All of these things require bodies. Our bodies are good and they're helpful as we want to live that out. And then there's a future piece, and I might do a whole sermon on this. It certainly probably will come up when we do our question bit. But we know that in the death of Jesus, his body was killed. He died. He was in a tomb for 3 days. And then he resurrected again. And that resurrected body bore the scars somehow of his resurrection. But it was also he was able to eat. So it was exactly the same kind of body. And it was completely different because he was able to appear in a room that had all the doors locked. I'm looking forward to that part. That'll be fun. But it tells us that our bodies are not going away. We're going to have bodies forever because that's what it means to be human, is to have a body. So we're in relationship with the land, and one of the consequences of that is the material world, and so we have bodies, okay? I need to hurry up, and we're going to be here until Christmas. Nobody wants to be here till Christmas. With the land. Secondly, with God. So we have a relationship with the land. We have a relationship with God. The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. We have no life without God. If we're only a body, we're not yet the image of God. When his breath enters our lungs, that happens, and we become the human beings that we're intended to be. We are made for relationship with God. Our image-bearingness, the life that comes from the breath of God, is core to being human. We want to pursue that relationship. And with Adam and Eve, it seems God walked with them in the garden, that he spent time with them, and that relationship was there. And as we're going to see, and most of you will know, the story tells us, that gets broken. It goes all wrong. And so the part of the point of it will be how we fix not just this relationship, but all four. Third one, with others. We've already recognized this. It was not good for the earthling to be alone. Loneliness is one of the biggest issues we face as humans, particularly living in the West. One of the biggest challenges the NHS faces is that loneliness impacts health. It's said to affect around 1 in 6 people in the UK is lonely. That has profound mental and physical health impacts to be lonely. God said it was not good for someone to be alone. We are made to be in relationship with other people, male and female. And this matters because it means church matters, right? A lot of folk are like, what's the church for? Yeah, I can follow Jesus on my own. I don't need the church. No, because we're supposed to be in relationship with others. Others who are like us and different to us. That's the gift. That's the gift. Frankly, as a church, it's at the heart of our mission strategy. We want to create spaces where we can be hospitable and bring people in and help them create relationship and have places where they belong. It's at the heart of what it means to be human, is to be in relationship with one another. And it's at the heart of what it means to be made in the image of God. Because as we said last week, he is plural. God is plural. The Trinity is a real thing. We're not getting into that this morning. We're just going to have to take that as read. But if God is in relationship, then of course we are also made for relationship with others. And then finally, to be in relationship with ourselves. Our text finished with that slightly quirky little line, Adam and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. This is a Middle Eastern idiom that basically means I can be myself without feeling ashamed. I don't need to wear a mask or to cover myself from others. Imagine that. Imagine having the complete self-confidence to be in such good relationship with ourselves, to be not anxious about anything, that we could describe ourselves as naked and feeling no shame. Wouldn't that be a gift? To be able to look at ourselves, body, mind, heart, soul, everything that we are, and say, oh, what a work of beauty you are. to come to church naked and feeling no shame. That's not an invitation to do it literally, but to come and be yourself, fully secure in who you are and who God has made you to be. These are the 4 relationships, I think, that are at the very core of what it means for us to be human. Relationship with God, relationship with others, relationship with ourselves, and a relationship with the land. And as we're going to see, I think the whole biblical story, everything that we would ever want to know in the rest of the Bible, can be seen through those 4 relationships. We're going to see them in chapter 3, all broken or damaged. And we'll talk about what language we should use then. And we'll see in Jesus the attempt to restore all 4 of those things. I hope. That's the goal anyway, if we do it properly. Finally, 2 trees. I really just want to cover this so that we've kind of laid a bit of groundwork for the coming part. God says that there are 2 trees in the center of this garden in Eden. One tree of life, which, and I'm just going to drop something in here, and if somebody wants to argue with me, then you can come for lunch in a couple of weeks. But I think that the fact that there is a tree of life says that humans are not innately immortal, that we required access to something that would give us life. I think that makes perfectly sense. I think it's also why we find the tree of life appear again in the book of Revelation. I think it's why we can understand Jesus himself as being the tree of life. But they can freely eat from that tree. They could just go and take and eat along with all the other trees that God has made that are good for fruit. And we can go and eat them all. But God says this one thing. And it really wasn't difficult, was it? He said, look, you've got all these trees, all of them. They're all good for food. Go eat them all. Go eat them all. Go eat them all. He says, you're free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die. And you're like, oh, just one tree. I mean, surely it wouldn't be that hard to just avoid that one tree. Well, as we'll discover, it was very difficult for them to avoid that one tree, and that caused an awful lot of problems, or at least that's the story that we have in the scriptures that help us to understand the consequences of that. We're going to talk at some length about the tree of knowledge and good and evil in a few weeks, because it raises a few questions. Anyone got any questions about it? Anyone? No? Oh, no, nobody put their hands up, so that's awesome. We're not doing it. I think the best thing I've seen written about this as a kind of one-sentence summary is this. Because the question is, what is knowing good and evil, and why is that a problem? Because it seems like a good thing. Knowing good and evil is about moral discernment. And it's about taking the authority to define good and bad by your own wisdom. And I think that sets us up nicely for what the problem might be with Adam and Eve eating what fruit from the tree? Very good, very good. So, if you're ever in a pub quiz, I know you're all far too holy to go to a pub quiz, but I do love a pub quiz. If you're ever and they ask you, what fruit was it? Everyone says, apple, correct. It doesn't tell us an apple. However, our dear friend Sam, a couple of years ago, convinced us all that it was a fig. And actually, I read a book this week where they said it was most likely a fig tree. And there's lots of good reasons for that, and I might bore you with that in a little while. But the fact that God is going to take fig leaves to cover them points us to the fact that there might well be a fig. Okay. Man, that was a lot of stuff, right? The good news for you is that when I first wrote that sermon this morning, there was a whole 2 other sections, and they're clearly not there anymore. Women and men together, both separately, image bearers of God, with their own dignity, profoundly important that we remember that. There are 4 relationships that we are made as humans to have, with God, with others, with ourselves, and with the land. They're broken, they're difficult, they're painful, and we're going to look in the next couple of weeks about why that is, and importantly, why it is that Jesus has made a way for those to be repaired. We often talk about the cross being this way that we're restored to God, and that's true. But it's also the way we're restored to one another, where relationships between people can be restored. It's where we're restored to relationship with ourselves and understand that actually God has something to say to us about me, about who I am, and how he has made me. And as we said a few weeks ago, that we are so beloved by him. And then the last one is, how are we meant to live in this world? How are we meant to walk gently in this place? Those are the things that we're invited to. I wonder if you would stand with me. Karen's going to come and pray for us, and we're going to sing one song to finish, and then we'll have a chance to grab coffee together.